To convert our parametric equations to Cartesian form, we're going to use the fact that cosine squared plus sine squared equals 1. That's the Pythagorean trig identity. So we know what x is and we know what y is. X is 5 cosine t, y is 9 sine t. And if we want to use this identity, well, we're going to have to make sure cosine and sine are squared. So the first thing we can do is just square our two things. So we get x squared equals 25 cosine squared. And y squared equals 81 sine squared. All right, and this is the piece we want. We want cosine squared and we want sine squared because we want to be able to add them and set them equal to 1. So we're going to have to divide by our coefficients to get sine squared and cosine squared by themselves. So we get x squared divided by 25 equals cosine squared. And we get y squared divided by 81 equals sine squared. So then we know that we can add cosine squared and sine squared together and set them equal to 1. So we get x squared over 25 plus y squared over 81 equals 1. And this is now Cartesian form because we have x and y in one equation, and x and y are working together to determine some output. Whereas before, x and y were both defined in terms of t. So we had x equals y equals in two separate equations working together to sketch out a path. And then we used a little algebra and some trig identities to combine them into one equation that only involves x and y. This is our Cartesian form. Similarly, we want to use another trig identity, secant squared t minus tangent squared is equal to 1. So again, we have a tangent and a secant here, but we need to square them so that we can use that identity. So we get x squared equals 25 tan squared. And we get y squared equals 16 sec squared. Okay, again, we want secant squared minus tangent squared, so we have to divide by our coefficients. So we get x squared over 25 equals tan squared. And y squared over 16 equals sec squared. And now if we subtract them, we can just set them equal to 1 by our trig identity, making sure we do secant squared first. Y squared over 16 minus x squared over 25, and that's equal to 1. Okay, so now we have our Cartesian form because we have x and y in the same equation, our two variables, rather than having x and y both in terms of a third variable, the parametric form. Taking that parametric form and made it Cartesian.